So I'm speaking with Darius Holbert, who's a fantastic composer, and he's scored some great films like Hobo with a Shotgun, the comedy western series Quickdraw, and the much talked about documentary Trophy Kids from Peter Berg. Darius also won Best Score at the Moondance International Film Festival for a score to Oh, the Places You'll Go. Darius, thanks so much for talking today.
Happy to be here.
So to start, what initially got you into music, and what was that kind of turning point that pushed you towards composing?
Let's see here. How far back you want to go?
As far back as you want.
I grew up in a musical family,
Mm-hmm.
so there was always music going on. Both my parents are musicians, and I went to performing arts high school in Dallas about 100 years ago now, and it was always kind of the plan was always for me to do music. 'Cause, I really I was part of a lot of little groups in coming up. Like I was part of the touring choir, the Texas Boys Choir, in the late '80s, I guess it was, and then went on to do the performing arts thing at the high school, and then there was a brief foray where I was totally burnt out and thought I was convinced I was going to be an anthropologist. Went to the University of New Mexico, where for a year I took my first survey course in anthropology and realized it was really boring, so I ran right over to back to the music department. And then I moved to London, went to the Royal Academy.
Wow.
For a bit, and then came back to Texas and finished at the University of North Texas with a degree in composition and piano performance. And then I was at the same kind of time during all that sort of classical and jazz training. I was playing a lot of honky tonks and running around on the Chitlin circuit with a band out of Texas. We had a number of different bands, but I was fronting a rock band as well too. So I was doing that whole thing, and then I decided to move to L.A. I got commissioned to write an opera in, I guess it was 2001, I guess. And I took that money and I went to, my parents have a house in way northern New Mexico. It's way up in the mountains, 8,500 feet or so. And I had this romantic notion that I was going to go up there and write the greatest opera the world has ever seen. and it didn't turn out that way. It's funny what solitude does to a person's brain. I was convinced after a while that there were mountain men coming after me, and they were somehow in collusion with bats that they had trained to get me. And I didn't see anybody for I guess it was almost about 2 months. And I talked to my sister on the phone. She's like, I think you maybe need to come down the mountain. So she was living in L.A. at the time, and I said, all right, well, I'll tell you what, I've got half my stuff here. You're probably right. So I left there, and I moved straight to L.A. And as soon as I got to L.A., I was doing a bunch of session work and playing with any band that I could get involved with. So doing touring and session stuff, and just playing out as much as I could and meet as many people as I could. And then so for a while, for a good long while, a few years, I was just strictly playing in bands, doing some artist development, some record producing, but mainly session stuff and musical directing of different acts, a bunch of pop acts. I worked with a ton of different people, which I feel like sort of was a great way to kind of inform my capacity to kind of jump from genre to genre, because I was doing a bunch of hip hop stuff, I was doing a little country stuff, a bunch of pop acts. I was working with Diane Warren. I musical directed Britney Spears and her erstwhile husband, K-Fed, which is hilarious. There's clips of me performing with K-Fed on the Tonight Show. Do not Google that. Do not look at it. But anyway, so and then I started kind of getting burnt out. About 3 years ago or so, I was out for about 6 months on the road, and I've been married, and we just recently had a daughter, and touring was kind of getting it's a young man's game, and so I started getting back into composition, which is what my original degree was. And I was working with a composer here in town. He was a good friend of mine, and he was doing a lot of stuff for ABC, a lot of promos and a lot of television stuff. And then a couple of indie films kind of came his way, and I started doing some writing for him. And then slowly but surely I got him to kind of just hand the reins over on a few of them to me. I mean, some of the lower budget, really not very well done films, but there were some stuff that I could kind of sink my teeth into and really kind of learn the ropes. And it was such a cathartic moment when I first started really sitting down by myself and scoring again, because it really did feel like coming home. You know, because I'd done composition kind of all my life too, and writing, and it's just more my wheelhouse, and I can, you know, work in my drawers all day and sleep in my bed at night, and I have to be out on the road and make a lot more money and be a lot more satisfied creatively, you know. So so ever since then I haven't really looked back. I don't tour at all anymore, and I still get phone calls about, you know, trying to come out again and play out. And every now and again I'll play out some, but it's only just for my own edification and enjoyment, and just to kind of get out of the house and stuff. But we have been in New York, based in New York, for about the past 2 years, and I was flying back and forth to L.A. But we just recently sort of moved the base of operations back to L.A., and it's great to be back in Los Angeles and be able to be fortunate enough to make a living making music. So.
Wow, that's a great story. I mean, I think there's a movie in there somewhere.
That's right. That's right.
But so tell me a little bit about your process. So what's the first thing you do when you start working on a project? Do you read the script? Do you like to talk to the director first, or do you just want to watch the first cut of the film? What kind of is the initial step in your creative process?
It all it depends. It really depends on what the project is.
Mm-hmm.
I get involved a lot. I would say the majority of the time I meet with a production team, with the director and producers, and then we'll kind of figure out whether or not we're a good fit, and then they'll send me a script. Sometimes I'll get approached before, like if some people know me from other stuff that I've done, then they'll just shoot me a script, or they'll send my manager a script, and he'll check it out, and then we'll see if it's a good fit from there. Sometimes I'll even get involved at the script stage, even before they've started shooting. I don't really like to do that, because there's a lot of stuff that changes in film production, you know. In fact, I think the first time I did it, I got involved before even they had cast the thing. And I went back and forth with the director about themes. He wanted something really thematic for all these different characters, and I went back and forth on this one character. And then we kind of got it to the place where we wanted, and then they went off to do the production, and then came back and I saw the first rough cut, and I was like, hey, where's that character that we wrote so much for? And he's like, oh yeah, we cut that guy a long time ago. So great. With a lot of kind of, you know, spinning of the wheels and things like that. But typically what'll happen is I'll get, like I said, I'll meet with the production team, and either they've sent me the script already, or they sent me a rough cut even. I try not to get involved before the picture is locked, before they're not going to, you know, make any final tweaks.
Mm-hmm.
After they made all their final tweaks. And then we'll just kind of talk about impetus, like influences, like things that sort of help inform the score, what they had pictured, what they, you know, other scores that they like. I'll always have them go through my site and through my reel and see kind of what they're drawn to from other stuff that I've done, and then we'll sit and we'll spot the film, usually, which is just basically everybody gets in the room, usually in my studio or in an edit bay at the production office, and we'll just kind of talk through the whole thing, and I'll make tons and tons of notes, and we'll talk about specific like ins and outs for music, and then I'll start doing kind of sonic palette stuff where we just talk about instrumentation, and I kind of throw some ideas together and stuff like that, and then once we get all that squared away, then we're kind of off to the races.
Well, that's really cool. That's an awesome process. So you're scoring the Hulu original series Quickdraw, which is a comedy western, and westerns are my favorite genre. So how did you even begin to approach something like that? Do you look at it as a comedy first, then a western? So what did the music need to do in that kind of context?
Well, the producers had a fairly specific idea of what they wanted. They wanted to do something that was really pretty derivative, like based on sort of the Morricone stuff, that kind of spaghetti western, kind of over the top, which is super fun to score. Mm-hmm. But they also wanted it was hilarious because when I first had the initial meetings with them, they were really hung up on the idea of having the Jew's harp, which is the kind of the mouth harp thing that sounds like, you've seen all corny old-timey westerns.
Yeah.
They're really hung up on this. So I was like, okay, great. So we started kind of kicking around these ideas, and they said that they really wanted to rely heavily on the Jew's harp throughout the score, which it's kind of a limiting instrument because it's really just basically one note. It's sort of like rhythmic more than anything else. But they had this one piece of music that they were absolutely in love with, and so I looked around actually for like a Jew's harp expert, like a virtuoso. I don't really think that they exist. I put up ads on like Craigslist and a whole bunch of Mandy.com, a whole bunch of places, and everyone was like, oh, well, I play the flute, I'm sure I can do this. I'm like, no, I need somebody that's really good. And I couldn't get anybody to respond. It was the weirdest thing. And so I actually, I was like, well, maybe I'll just buy a bunch of Jew's harps and I'll teach myself. So I bought a whole bunch of them, and I started looking on YouTube and then, taking these little lessons from these little tiny clips from different people around the world that had exhibiting different techniques or whatever. And I taught myself, and I got pretty good, I guess. But the producers would send me these notes back after the initial time. They're like, it's not quite right. Like, it sounds good, it's not quite right. And it was this one specific clip that they loved so much, and I could not figure out how to emulate it. So I actually reached out to 3 of the world's foremost Jew's harp experts. And by the way, I'm saying Jew's harp. Every time I say it, I still feel kind of weird about it because it sounds vaguely racist. They insist, all 3 of these people, and one person was in Thailand, one person was in Australia, and another person was in, I think, Seattle, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., and they all say, no, it's absolutely Jew's harp. It is not jaw harp. It is not mouth harp. It's nothing but Jew's harp. But it has nothing to do with Judaism. It's,
right.
For some reason, it's been sort of and they also all claim that it's the world's oldest instrument. I don't know if I buy that it's older than like somebody stringing some animal skin across some bones and making a drum or something like that. But they all claim that it was. Anyways, so I sent this clip to all 3 of these guys, and they're all like, they all ran their own little message boards, and they're all like, I think the bulk of them built their own instruments as well. And I sent it to all 3 of them, and 2 of them got back to me and said, oh, you're looking for this very specific kind of Jew's harp, which is actually not a Jew's harp, but it's the same kind of like technology, and it's from Vietnam, and it's called the Dan Moi or whatever. So I was like, okay, well, I need the Dan Moi. So I actually bought a few of these things, and they sent them to me, and I learned how to play them. They're really different. Learned how to play those too, and then the producers are absolutely ecstatic because it was exactly what they were looking for.
Wow.
And so now, if you ever know anybody who needs, like I did, a Jew's harp virtuoso, just call me because I am incredibly skilled.
Will do.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but it's a super fun score. It's really like I said, it's derivative, so I get to throw in a lot of like whip cracks and like have some like virtual modeling whistling and a lot of and a lot of like super trimmed out guitars, and yeah, it's really fun, man.
Yeah, I guess it is, since it is a comedy, you can definitely just throw kind of everything at it and
absolutely
have a blast.
Yeah, kind of more over the top, the better.
Right.
Yeah, so it's been super fun.
And so you also scored Trophy Kids for Peter Berg, which is a fascinating documentary about kids who play sports in school and their parents and that kind of relationship. So what about this story fascinated you as a storyteller?
Well, it's funny because when I saw the original rough cut, this was early on kind of in the process, and the rough cut was really long, and it had tons and tons of footage. And a lot of I had just become a parent. Well, not a parent, but a father. Fairly recently, right when I had seen the rough cut, it was last year sometime. And I played sports all growing up and everything, but these parents are just it's really borderline. It almost made me want to call Child Protective Services just because of the way that they treated these kids, and it was unbelievable. I mean, because I think there's a fine line between being involved in in making sure your child progresses in a positive way, and really kind of beating them up if they don't, sort of fulfill these goals that you've set for them. And the funny thing is that when I was looking at the original, the rough cut and the raw footage, I mean, they really pulled together some amazing stuff. I don't understand how these parents thought it would be a good idea to behave the way they did on camera.
Mm-hmm.
But it's incredible the stuff that they got. But it's really heart wrenching, a lot of the stuff, to see these kids just really get beat up on. I mean, not physically abused, but incredibly mentally and emotionally abused.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked originally with the rough cut, and we're kind of building it together. And then they got it to a point where they liked it, and then Peter Berg brought it to HBO because he was going to start this new series, which is now running, which Trophy Kids kind of kicked it off. It's called State of Play.
Right.
And it's basically like a doc series for HBO, and it's panels discussing current topics in sports, and then they will show like a portion of a documentary or a full documentary. It's similar to kind of 30 for 30, what ESPN has done so well. But it's really cool. This new State of Play is really cool because it's sort of a broad range of topics, and I thought Trophy Kids was a really good way to start because the story itself is such a. I feel like it's there's always been stage parents. There's always been parents that want to push their kids and do the whole thing and whatever. But I feel like it's sort of a really contemporary idea of having basically molding your child into becoming the perfect athlete is a fairly contemporary story. I mean,
Right.
It's a fairly current story, and because it's such a viable career choice, and it hasn't been always that way, obviously. So I think that being able to kind of tell that part of the story, and then it's wrought with emotion. I mean, there's so much of the footage that they got, which is incredibly sad. There's a lot of great triumph in it. There's a lot of as a composer, it was really fun to work on, just because it really does. It really you can help inform the story and also kind of push it along with sort of making the emotional resonance through the music.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that you approach documentary differently than a fictional narrative? Do you take into consideration that these are real people, and does that affect the way you approach the music?
No, I think it's probably the same. I mean, it's still the same story, whether it's a character or it's actually actual
Mm-hmm.
cinema verite. I think that there's still great documentarians make a documentary feel like a movie anyways with a film. It's like a lot of great docs. You think, well, there's no way that they could even write this. It's even so much better than any kind of fiction. And there's always great arcs, character arcs, and it's the same thing. And I feel like that. I don't really think that there's any difference. That's an interesting question. I don't feel like there's any difference in the way that I look at it. Except maybe that if it is a documentary, then you don't want to be super anachronistic with the kind of music that you're writing. Like, you have to write fairly if it's a contemporary piece. But I guess that would be the same thing if it was fiction. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's because I talked to food composers. I asked that question too, and some of them most of them say what you say, and they say they treat it as exactly the same. But there are a few people who say that they get more, I guess, emotionally invested in the subject matter or behind the characters or the people, because they're real people, and it does kind of influence, I guess, the way they approach it musically. I guess maybe with more respect and more refinement. But I think it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, that is interesting. I have to think about that some more.
So, and another recent film you also did, a completely different genre, is Old 37, which is kind of the horror thriller world. So what appeals to you most about that genre? And in your opinion, what makes a great horror score?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I think, number one, as far as Old 37, we're just now getting to the point where we haven't even spotted it yet. But I've been working with the production team for quite a while, and we're rolling that out really quickly. I think that they're done with the fine cut, I think maybe even this week. I'm super excited about that because I read the script. I was friends with the writer, and I got the script pretty early on, even before I think that they were really even in pre-production, and it was cool. It was a really cool, compelling story, and especially the way that he presented it. I don't know if you know Paul Travers. He's a great guy. He had a dream about. I want to make sure I'm getting this right. He had a dream. It was almost the film in its entirety, basically about these two brothers that their dad has this old ambulance, and they basically are listening to the scanner, and they get to they hear about accidents, and they'll take their dad's old creepy beat up ambulance to the scene of the accident before the actual EMTs show up. And so that was his dream. He woke up and wrote it down, almost completely wrote it down, like almost immediately, apparently. And I thought that was such a crazy, terrifying premise to a film. I was really excited about getting to work on it. And so then I even went out to set when they were shooting, and they shot in Long Island last year, and then some this year as well. I went out to set too, and the sets were terrifying. Everything was really, really super creepy, and it was the day that I went out was really cold and rainy, and it was awesome. So I'm really excited to work on that because, to answer your second question, because like horror is I would suggest is at least 50% driven by the music.
Yeah.
That it really like I just finished scoring another horror film. Actually, last week we wrapped for this guy who works at Blumhouse, which is Paranormal Activity. So I just finished a film for that guy, and he's like he said it perfectly. He said, I sat down one day and I watched Paranormal Activity with the sound off, and it was the most boring movie I've ever seen in my life. Because you don't get, and even though the score, especially in Paranormal Activity, there's very little score, but it's still really kind of like pushes the story so much when it comes to horror, because all the anticipation and it's so hard to get that when it's just quiet,
Right.
So it's super fun to work on horror, and that's why I've worked on a lot of horror. It was never really my intention to be so heavily involved in all horror stuff, because I love horror films, but I wouldn't consider myself like a horror guy. Like this guy that I just finished a film for last week. I mean, he is a horror guy. He kept bringing me over different DVDs, and like, you gotta watch this, and these films I've never heard of, and I watched them, and they were terrifying. They're terrifying, but I would have never really. I'm not a genre guy like that. But yeah, to be able to work on horror films is a real treat, because you're not necessarily just giving like underlying cues. You're actually driving the story.
Yeah.
There's a lot where, like, a lot of times, especially if it's like a dialogue heavy film, or it's like some sort of drama, or even comedies, really, the cues are kind of like function as bumpers almost. Like they go like transitions basically between one scene to the next, or if you want to heighten some kind of sense, then you put a little string flourishes or some kind of like dramatic sweeping strings or whatever. But with horror, it's a lot of like, there's a lot of quiet. There's a lot of anticipation before the big scares, or there's a lot of there's a lot of moments that where the music really sits on top of the rest. It's not sort of ancillary to the story. It's not underneath the dialogue. It's not underneath the SFX or the ADR Foley or whatever. It's really sitting on top and driving it. And I think that as a composer, that's great, because then you really get to sit in the driver's seat, and that's super fun.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, to wrap up, I always like to ask composers this one question: if you could score any film ever made, with no disrespect to the original composer and pretending the original score never existed, which film would you choose?
Oh, damn. How long do I have to think about it? 3 seconds? I could take I talk about that for an hour, I'm sure.
So what's the first thing that pops in your head? The first, like...
what I thought about is that I'm originally from Texas, and I'm a huge fan of Westerns, and I think I'm also in pre-production on this other Western, short Western film that's coming up, and I'm really thinking about Westerns a lot, and I think I want to do a big, sweeping, epic, like, Giant.
Oh, wow.
Giant movie with Rock Hudson and Anthony Fest. Yeah, something like that would be super, super fun. And I haven't been able to do any films that are really like the big kind of epic 3-hour because
Mm-hmm.
they don't really get made anymore.
I know.
Big movies like that, But yeah, that's funny. I wonder why that popped in my head. That's a great question, though.
That's a good
And
answer. I think the only other composer who's ever said giant was Elliot Goldenthal, so you share that with him.
Really?
Yeah.
No kidding. That's funny. Oh,
But
cool.
Darius, thank you so much for your time today. It was such a great pleasure and honor to talk to you, and it was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having such great questions.